May 1945. The smoke over Berlin has barely cleared, and the victory celebrations in the streets are still deafening. But beneath the surface of the parades, a silent, predatory conflict is already unfolding in the ruins. While the world watches the maps being redrawn with ink and paper, intelligence officers are engaged in a high-stakes hunt through the skeletal remains of a broken empire. They are not looking for gold or territory, or even the remnants of the fallen leadership. They are hunting for something far more valuable: human minds. Men who spent the last decade designing the most terrifying technology the world had ever seen are suddenly the most sought-after prizes in a race that will determine the next century of human history. The choice facing the victors is a chilling paradox: to seek justice for the past or to secure the future by any means necessary. The conflict has ended, but the Allied powers have just realized a terrifying truth. The technological gap between their own equipment and what had been developed in underground labs across the Harz Mountains is staggering. They find blueprints for supersonic jets, infrared night vision scopes, and guided missiles that can strike from across the horizon. Advancements that appeared decades ahead of their time. This black technology did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the product of specialized scientists who operated within a system that has now been dismantled. The scramble for these individuals has become a desperate game of chess between the East and the West. Every engineer captured by the Americans is a potential threat neutralized in the hands of the Soviets. It is a moment of profound moral tension, where the requirement for national security begins to outweigh the calls for accountability. In the basement of Bonn University, a Polish lab technician discovers a series of documents stuffed into a toilet, partially destroyed but still legible. This is the Osenberg List. It is a catalog of the scientific elite, a roll call of the brains behind the V-2 rockets, the nerve gas, and the jet engines. When this list reaches American intelligence, the mission shifts from simple interrogation to a massive, clandestine recruitment effort. The goal is simple: reach these men before the Soviet Union does. The directive is clear, but the ethical implications are murky. These are individuals who worked at the highest levels of a regime currently being put on trial for crimes against humanity. Yet, in the windowless offices of the Pentagon, the calculus is different. To let this knowledge slip into the hands of a new rival is considered a risk the United States cannot afford to take. The operation is initially given the name Overcast, but it will soon be rebranded with a name that sounds like a mundane office task: Operation Paperclip. The name is derived from the simple metal supply used to identify the files of scientists deemed essential for the post-war effort. A paperclip attached to a folder signals that a scientist's history is to be sanitized. Their records are polished, their political affiliations are obscured, and their past is rewritten to bypass the restrictive laws that prevent anyone associated with the previous regime from entering the United States. It is a bureaucratic sleight of hand, an alchemy that allows the architects of advanced weaponry to transition from the shadows of a fallen state to the sunlit laboratories of the New World. The most prominent figure in this narrative is a young rocket engineer named Wernher von Braun. To some, he is a visionary who dreams of the stars. To others, he is a pragmatist who built the rockets that rained fire on London. In May 1945, von Braun is hiding in the Bavarian Alps. He knows his value. He knows that as the alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union begins to fracture, his expertise in guidance systems and liquid fuel engines makes him indispensable. When he eventually surrenders to American forces, he does not come as a broken prisoner of war. He comes as a man holding the keys to the upper atmosphere. The negotiations that follow are not about guilt or innocence. They are about thrust, trajectories, and the logistics of the next war. While the Americans focus on high-profile names, the Soviet Union executes a different, more sweeping strategy. On the early morning of October 22, 1946, the Soviet Interior Ministry launches Operation Osoaviakhim. In a single coordinated night, thousands of specialized workers, engineers, and their families are rounded up at gunpoint and loaded onto trains headed for the Soviet interior. Entire research facilities are dismantled, brick by brick, and shipped east. The Soviets are not just looking for the leaders, they are looking for the entire infrastructure of production. They recognize that to catch up with the West, they need the hands that built the machines, not just the minds that designed them. The train tracks leading toward Moscow are the arteries of a new industrial empire, fueled by the forced expertise of the defeated. Back in the United States, the arrival of these specialists is met with a mixture of awe and unease. Many within the American scientific community are horrified to find themselves working alongside men who were, until recently, their sworn enemies. Internal memos circulate through the State Department, questioning the integrity of the program and the message it sends to the world. However, as the Cold War begins to freeze the international landscape, these concerns are sidelined. The zero-sum mentality of the era suggests that if the United States does not utilize this expertise, the Soviet Union certainly will. This logic creates a shield around the paperclip scientists, allowing them to embed themselves deeply into the American military-industrial complex, where their pasts are buried under layers of classified stamps. The results of this silent recruitment are undeniable. The V-2 rocket, once a weapon of terror, becomes the ancestor of the Redstone rockets that launched the first American satellites. The expertise brought over during these years accelerates the development of jet engines, synthetic rubber, and aerospace medicine. By the time the 1960s arrive, many of the key figures leading the Apollo program are the same men who were hunted through the ruins of Europe in 1945. The dream of landing on the moon is propelled by engines designed by individuals with deeply complicated legacies. It is a historical reality that remains a point of reflection. The path to the stars was paved in part by those who had served the darkest corners of the earth. The atmosphere of the time is one of intense, suffocating secrecy. The American public is told that these are useful scientists whose contributions are vital for national interest. Their professional histories are rewritten to emphasize scientific curiosity over political involvement. This sanitization process is so effective that for many years the true scale of the operation remains hidden from the general populace. It is only through later declassifications and the tireless work of investigative researchers that the full scope of the program begins to emerge, revealing a complex web of pragmatism, compromise, and the cold reality of power. In the East, the story follows a different but equally intense trajectory. The Soviet Union utilizes its captured German specialists to jumpstart its own rocket programs, eventually leading to the successful launch of Sputnik. However, unlike their counterparts in the West, These scientists are rarely integrated into Soviet society. They live in closed cities, isolated and monitored, their every move watched by the secret police. They are tools to be used until their knowledge is fully absorbed by Soviet engineers. Once their usefulness is exhausted, most are allowed to return to Germany in the early 1950s. This stands in sharp contrast to the American approach, where many paperclip scientists become naturalized citizens, living out their lives as respected members of their communities, their pasts a forgotten footnote in their success stories. The moral dilemma of Operation Paperclip is a question that lingers long after the actors have left the stage. Does the benefit of scientific progress justify the bypass of accountability? The technology harvested in the aftermath of 1945 undoubtedly saved lives in some sectors, while creating the potential for massive destruction in others. It fueled the growth of the aerospace industry and led to innovations that define our modern world, from global communications to high-speed travel. Yet the shadows of the labor camps and the destruction caused by the early versions of these technologies remain part of the narrative. The legacy of the program is a tapestry woven with both brilliance and darkness. As the Cold War progressed, the contribution of these scientists became more public, but it was always framed through the lens of their new loyalties. Wernher von Braun became a household name, a television personality explaining the wonders of space to a captivated American public. He was the face of the future, a man who had successfully transitioned from building weapons of war to building the dream of space exploration. However, the files kept in government archives told a more nuanced story. They recorded the internal debates within the Pentagon, where officials wrestled with the optics of the program versus its strategic necessity. They knew that the public's acceptance of these men depended entirely on the erasure of their previous lives. The black technology acquired during this era extended far beyond rockets. It reached into the realms of chemical warfare, psychological research, and advanced physics. The knowledge transfer was so vast that it is difficult to find a branch of mid-century military science that was not influenced by these recruits. The competition for this knowledge created a hidden front line, where intelligence agents were more important than infantry. It was a world of safe houses, forged documents, and clandestine border crossings. Every success for one side was viewed as a catastrophic failure for the other, fueling a cycle of suspicion that would last for decades and define the geopolitical reality of the 20th century. This historical period serves as a reminder of how quickly the lines between right and wrong can blur in the face of perceived existential threats. The decision to launch Operation Paperclip was made in a vacuum of uncertainty, where the fear of a new global conflict outweighed the lessons of the one that had just ended. It was a gamble that paid off in terms of technological superiority, but it left a lingering question about the cost of that success. The world we live in today, with its satellites, jet travel, and digital connectivity, is built on a foundation that includes the efforts of these controversial figures. We are the beneficiaries of their genius and the inheritors of their shadows. Reflecting on the era, one can see how the events of 1945 set the stage for the next half-century. The division of technology and talent between the US and the USSR did not just start the space race. It solidified the ideological divide of the Cold War. The divided spoils of the scientific elite became the pillars of two competing superpowers. As we look at the ruins of those post-war years, we see not just the end of a conflict, but the birth of a new kind of power, one that is defined by information, innovation, and the strategic management of human capital. The story of Operation Paperclip is not just about rockets and paperclips. It is about the complexity of human nature and the difficult choices made in the name of progress. It challenges the notion that history is a simple narrative of good versus evil, showing instead a world of gray areas where survival and ambition often dictate the path forward. The scientists who crossed the ocean or were taken east were pawns in a much larger game. Yet they ended up being the ones who designed the board. Their influence is felt every time a rocket launches or a new jet takes to the skies. Today, the archives are mostly open and the names are known. The controversy has aged into history, but the lessons remain relevant. In an age where technology is advancing faster than our ability to regulate it, the story of how the modern era began in the shadows of 1945 is more than a thriller. It is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that every breakthrough comes with a history, and every leap forward is often preceded by a series of quiet, difficult decisions made in the dark. The moral weight of the Paperclip files is not just about what happened then, but about what we are willing to compromise now in the name of the next great discovery. The final chapter of this narrative is not written in the history books, but in the technology we use every day. The legacy of those divided shares of black technology continues to evolve. As we look toward the next frontier of exploration, the echoes of that 1945 hunt for minds still resonate. We are the inheritors of a world shaped by a desperate race for knowledge, a race that proved that in the aftermath of total war, the most powerful weapon is not a bomb, but the mind that knows how to build one, and the nation that is willing to give that mind a new start. The silence that followed the fall of Berlin was never a peace. It was a transition from a war of steel to a war of science. Operation Paperclip and its Soviet counterparts were the bridge between those two worlds. They represent a moment when the pursuit of the future became more important than the weight of the past. As we continue to reach for the stars, we do so on the shoulders of giants whose paths were often shrouded in secrecy. The journey they took remains one of the most intriguing and debated chapters of the modern age. A story of how the world was rebuilt from the fragments of its own destruction.